Hey y'all, welcome back to the shop. This is Terry. Today we're back on our Talon, and we're on a project that I've been looking forward to for a long time. Anybody that's followed the channel knows that we've had a relationship with Bandit UTV Suspension for the last few years. Well, really almost ever since we've had the Talon, and we've been through every stage with them. Started with the tender springs, which was a major improvement over stock on our X, and we moved up a while back to the full spring kit, the heavy spring kit we have on ours, and that made another huge step up. And now Bandit has really done something that's cool, and I'm happy to be getting them and putting them on. And that is their new complete shock kits. This is their 46 level 5 full shock kit for the Talon X, and they are pretty incredible. I'll put some stills up here so you can see just the difference between what we have here from Bandit now and the original Fox shocks that we've kind of tricked out with like I said, all the Bandit heavy spring kit, JC Racing nitrogen kit, all that stuff. So I'll throw some stills up here so y'all can see the difference. A lot bigger shock, a lot bigger shock shaft. They're the same length, but they have more travel. Major adjustability here, low speed and high speed compression, rebound, crossover rings. Got Schrader valves for the nitrogen, bigger nitrogen cylinders here. I mean, just every way that you could trick one out, it is. And I said, let me throw some stills up here and I'll show you the difference. All right, we're back, and as you can see, there's just a huge difference here between what Ted at Bandit is building with these shocks and the factory shocks. And I want to talk a little bit about Bandit. A lot of people not too familiar with Bandit, so we'll talk just a little bit about Bandit. Bandit is an American company. They're out of Michigan. They build these shocks one at a time. Basically, just have Ted building shocks. So that's what's going on up there. It's not a huge company that's mass producing millions of shocks. It's a company that's hand building every single shock, and specifically for your application. You'll see when you go to order them that, I mean, they're asking questions about your Talon, what you do, and how much, weight, all these different things, so they can help to adjust these on their end, or get springs and all that right, so they're set up for your Talon and how you ride. All these pieces are all sourced in the U.S. They're all U.S. made, springs and everything that goes into these shocks, and nothing comes from overseas. Everything's all U.S. made, and like I said, made one at a time. They send really good instructions with it, and let me be the first to say, I'm not the shock guy. The nuts and bolts of changing springs and doing the JC Racing nitrogen stuff and what we've done before on shocks has really been pretty simple, because there's really no adjustment on the Fox X shocks except for the little clicker that I've left on soft ever since I bought it, and set the preload, and that's really all it was. There's a lot more here. You have low and high speed compression, you got crossover rings, you got rebound adjustment. We're going to leave all of the compression and rebound and all that exactly the way it was whenever it came from Bandit, and they set them up pretty soft, compression in the mid-range and all that. We're just going to leave that the way that they have it to start off with. We will adjust the preload to get back to the heights, the ground clearance that I like on the Talon, and we'll discuss that more whenever we're over there, and I'll show you how to adjust these. The fronts take this little rod, turns the adjuster on the front, and they lock down with an Allen head screw. So they send those. Let's talk a little bit about limit straps. They do want limit straps on all these shocks. just a really good idea on any UTV shock. You just think about, especially like us, we got 32-inch Rockzillas. We got the HD9 bead locks, and all that weight, all that suspension weight, tire weight, everything is just hanging on this shock shaft when those tires are in the air. So it's a really good idea to have limit straps anyway, one way or the other, but they do recommend it. And when you order these, you will get properly sized limit straps for both ends with the shock kit. They did not have the limit straps in whenever I got these, and I just made a deal to buy my own. So I bought limit straps from All Things UTV. They're actually PRP straps that All Things has already sized for the X's or R's. So that's what I did, and that's what I'm installing. One thing that you will need to get is hardware for the limit straps, and All Things UTV actually sells the proper bolt kits, and I'll link to these down in the description. But they sell the proper bolt kits with the spacer and everything, because you need the spacer to clear the shock bodies once you put it together. It's a simple deal, but you'll see once we get over there, so super simple. They also recommend shock covers, and so do I. I've had shock covers on the Talon from square one, really. It just makes sense to keep all that stuff off of the shock shaft. It wouldn't take a whole lot to a little rock or whatever ding the shock shaft and have premature wear on seals and all that stuff. These are like $75 right now on eBay. I will link to these as well. Really important, especially on the rear. The Fox shocks, as y'all know, had that little plastic shield on the front of the shock that these are not going to have. So really important to try to keep that stuff off of the shock, especially on the rear. So like I said, these are just, to me, are just amazing pieces. Can't wait to get them on. So let me move over to the Talon. I'm going to get these on. Shocks are on there. So while we're up here on the top side, let's talk a little bit about this limit strap situation. The hardware worked out fine, but it has to be oriented towards the rear. You can see the bolt there and how much it sticks out towards the rear. If that was pointed towards the front, there's interference with that overflow tank. So if you're not going to move the overflow tank, then on the right side it's going to have to be on the rear. On the left side, it will work on either side, but on the right side, like I said, without moving the tank or doing something different, you're going to have to orient it towards the rear. It was not a big deal one way or the other, but save you a little time there. And the shock just looks fantastic. I mean, I just I'm so excited about it. It's very cool. So let me let's talk about preload. So on mine, yours is likely different, but on mine, from the bottom of this shock head, not from the bottom of this ring, but from the bottom of the shock head or the top of that ring to the bottom of the adjusting ring, ended up being 2 3/4 on the front. It was just about an inch or so from Bandit, which is just minimum preload. So you can save yourself a lot of heartache too, to whenever you're adjusting these. Whenever you turn this, you're gonna have to turn this Allen to loosen up that nut. So you're gonna have to, if it's oriented out towards the outside so you can get to that easier, it's gonna be a lot easier. And what I did here to adjust the preload was I actually took the limit straps off. I would suggest just to leave them off to start off with until you're done with this process. But I took the limit strap off, jacked it up so we had no weight or till the front tires are off the ground, so the shock's fully extended. Then I was literally able, once this Allen was loose, to just take the spring and spin the spring by hand, holding on to this so everything kind of stayed together. And I was able to get almost all of the preload that I needed doing it that way. And then right at the very end, I had to get the last like 1/4 inch or so with the little shaft tool in these holes to turn this thing. And then, like I said, once you're done, just turn it till it's oriented with this bolt on the outside, and life will be much better for you, way easier. I don't really know where these crossover rings need to be, but obviously with lowering this that much, they needed to be lower, so I went ahead and lowered the crossover rings an inch from where they were. Just going to take some trial and error to figure that out, but that's how we have the front set up, and that's how we got there. So let me reset at the rear, and we'll talk about that. Okay, on the rear, there is a similar interference situation with the hardware for the limit straps. The limit straps need to be on the inside. This panel that you can see right here, which is this whole panel, is in the way. It interferes with the bolt. So if you have it turned the other way, you can do that, but you're going to have to cut that panel out. And then obviously dirt, mud, and everything's going to go through there. And incidentally, right on the other side of that panel, the interior panel has a hole in it right there too. So it's going to go all the way in. I did not want to take that panel all the way out because I got a whole bunch of stuff attached to it that's all bolted, and the Honda flares and all that. So I did not want to do that. So I pulled out these push pins back here, as many as I could, and basically just pried the panel outward until I could get it out past the shock, and then I worked up in there. So there's a second point of interference here. You can see this chassis tube right here, and it's going up there, and it's the bolt, the threaded portion of the bolt is really close to that tube. So if you push the bolt in there all the way, you can't get the nut on it. So what you have to do is just put the bolt through enough to get the spacer, the strap, the washer, and the nut on there. And then just have to hold the nut with an open-ended wrench, and I actually spun the bolt with my air ratchet with a 10mm socket on it, Allen head socket. So that was the simplest way that I could figure out to do it. Okay, let's talk about preload back here. So preload on this is 2 inches, and a little bit simpler measurement back here on the back. Hard to see, sorry, but from the bottom of that shock head to the bottom of this adjuster is 2 3/4. No, I'm sorry, is 2 inches. 2 3/4 on the front, 2 inches on the back. And I'll talk more about how to do this over there once we get to finish up here, but basically I'm just taking a punch and a hammer and knocking that upper nut, the locking nut, loose, and then turning that lower nut to compress the shock, or to compress the spring, to get more preload. I could not get that nut to come down with just turning the spring as is. Once again, the same as it is on the front, you need to take the limit strap off and fully extend the shock by jacking the thing up, by jacking the Talon up. If you don't do that, there's way too much pressure on it, and you can't get it to turn. So what I did was I used and I'll show you when we finish up, but my little Tusk spring compressors, just to get a little bit of pressure off the spring. Then I was able to grab the nut and the spring together and turn everything to get down to where I needed to be, to get the preload that I needed to get my ride height to where I was looking for. So a little bit more complicated on the back. If somebody comes up with a better way, absolutely comment. But like I said, I just used my little Tusk spring compressors just to get a little more compression so I could spin all that together. Those indentions on that collar are pretty sharp, so definitely wear a pair of gloves there. So I was able to just hold all that together and turn the spring similar to the front to get it down once I had the spring compressors on there. So obviously everything fit up great back here. Looks awesome. And we'll finish up and with some final thoughts here in just a minute. All right, we're back. Let's kind of put a period on the Bandit shock deal. And obviously I've done this quite a bit between the tenders and the full springs and all this. So I don't, running around the neighborhood, as you're adjusting these, I said the fronts, for example, only had about an inch down from where we talked about, and I want to show you on the factory shock where you measure again. The front's got this little collar on it, so on those Bandit shocks, so it's not there. It's actually from the bottom lip that's on this shock head down to where the adjuster is actually contacting the spring to the bottom of the adjuster. That's how I did my measurements anyway. So if you're trying to follow me, that's where they are, which is again is 2 inches on the rear, 2 3/4 inches on the front. And like I said, that gave me 16 inches clearance on the front to that little bracket or the little tab that I showed you on the front skid plate, and 15.5 on the back to the bottom of that little loop, which is basically where I like to run it. Had success running it, and it took a while. I spent about 3.5 hours between getting the shocks mounted, the sort of back and forth like we talked about on the limit straps, trying to figure out that the best way to do it is the front straps need to be on the back and the back straps need to be on the inside, and then dealing with the interference with the plastics and that stuff that we had in the chassis member with the longer bolts. So once I got all that figured out, it was no big deal. So hopefully being able to kind of tip you guys off on those things will save you some time there. But I did spend about 3.5 hours myself on this. So in the back, once again, now we're on 2 inches there. Those adjusters, they're aluminum, of course, but they're much more like these adjusters. Actually took just a hammer and a punch, you can do it with a screwdriver or whatever, and go in these little notches and knock that locking nut loose, spin it up, and then I could not get those adjusters to go just by spinning the spring like we just talked about. I had to put on my gloves. Those little notches on those aluminum adjusters are pretty sharp, so you definitely want to wear gloves there. But I was able to do that up to a point, and then I could not get it to turn anymore. I don't have the proper spanner wrench to make that turn. So what I did was I used my little Tusk spring compressors and just took a little pressure off the spring with these little spring compressors, and then I was able to spin it on down and make that happen. But a little, like I said, trial and error there. Took up some time trying to figure out how to get it down there. And like I said, on the rear, just had to gain about an inch. Had to gain more on the front than the rear as far as preload goes. So all of that worked out really well. And first impressions, like I said before, I go out and run around the back, go run over everything in my yard. A bunch of rocks and stuff in the yard, so I can run over a bunch of rocks in the yard, jump off the curbs, both directions, whatever. And this seems much more plush than anything we've had before. And like I talked about way back in the intro, I was really pretty impressed with the heavy spring, the full heavy spring kit from Bandit. And a lot of people that follow me, just by watching it or riding with me, were impressed with it too, because that's a solid kit for no revalving or anything, just springs. But this feels like a whole nother level. It almost has that. Well, it's just really plush. That first travel on these springs is just really, really plush. But I can tell that whenever I am in the back and I'm trying to corner harder back here, fairly hard as I can back here, then it feels more like that spring kit does. You notice we're not running a sway bar on the rear. I took the sway bar off whenever we put those heavy springs on there, and I have no intention to put it back on. For what we do, I mean, if I was going to run 70 miles an hour all the time and be pitching it sideways, I'd probably have it on there. But that's just not how we ride. I mean, that's just not conducive to where we ride most of the time. We talked about in the intro again, where we ride is steep and rocky and rough and tight. So most of the time it's fairly slow. Most of the time on the trails, I mean, we're under 20 miles an hour, we're under 25 miles an hour. A lot of times we're almost like rock crawling with the places that we that we ride and the places that we love to ride. And I feel like this is going to be a really big jump forward in being able to adjust everything. And I'll learn more about that as we go and as we ride, and I'll come back and, once we get some rides on it, I'll come back and report again about adjustments that I made and how it was and how it is and all of that. But my gut feeling from what I see and from what I know how it was when we first put the tender springs on, and then when we changed to the full spring kit, we took the sway bar off, now going to this seems like a quantum leap forward in like low speed plushness, but still not that uneasy feeling in the corners if you're driving a little harder. So I think this is really going to be the deal. But I will come back and report once we've had some time to ride with it and to do some adjusting on it. We don't have any trips scheduled right now, but we'll go in the next few weeks, I'm sure, and we'll see how that goes on a couple of trips, and I'll come back and report. But right now, I feel like this is just an awesome thing. $2,500 for the whole set is way less than anybody else, and I have nothing else to compare with. I'll be able to tell you that, other than just the steps that we've been through in suspension here, and this definitely feels like a giant leap forward. So any questions or comments, go ahead and throw them down there in the comment section. And like I said, I'll come back and post a link to a follow-up video in the description on this video as soon as there is one. Just going to take us a little bit of time to go and adjust with rebounds and compression and see if the preloads are good. I'm not sure. I knew I needed to go down on the crossovers because obviously I went down on the adjusters, so I didn't go down as much on the crossovers as I did on the adjusters. But I did go down an inch from where Bandit had them set on the front and the rear. So we'll see how all that works out, and I'll report back. Thanks so much for watching. Please subscribe. Please hit that thumbs up button. That really helps us with YouTube and helps us to be able to do what we do. Thanks again for watching. Everybody have a great day.